This video presentation is a visual and audio communication method used to inform and educate the public on why it is important to have a treaty. In Aotearoa, te Tiriti o Waitangi evolved from the doctrine of discoveries. Up until recently, August 15, 2023, I had never heard of the doctrine of discovery, and like most New Zealanders, I knew of te Tiriti o Waitangi. On a recent visit to Lisbon, Portugal, I recall visiting a monument referred to as Padrão dos Descobrimentos that pays homage to these explorers. The doctrine of discoveries is a legal and religious concept that has been used for centuries to justify Christian colonial conquest. It was a Catholic religion based on the frameworks from Spain, Portugal and England to colonize many lands, and the advancement idea that European peoples, culture and religions are more superior to all others. According to scholar Tina Ngata, the doctrine of discoveries text gave permission and describes a good Christian duty to invade, to search out, to capture, to conquest and subdue all pagans that do not believe in Christ. So anybody who were not Christian or who were not European were to be placed or dispossessed them of their kingdoms, their lands, their principalities, and all of their possessions, and to take them and reduce their person to perpetual slavery. The colonizers had two options. One was to convert the indigenous and colonize them, if not, enslave them. The other option was to exterminate or kill them. Throughout history, the entitlement to dehumanize indigenous people down to commodities and use them for profit making still exists even today. The dark gory past that the doctrine of discovery portrayed has accounts of Christians with swords and pike carrying out massacres and strange cruelties against the indigenous people. They attacked towns and spared neither women or children, pregnant women and old women, by stabbing them and dismembering them, cutting people into pieces as if they were dealing with sheep in a slaughterhouse. With one strike of the sword could split a man in two, or could cut off his head and spill his entrails with a single stroke of the pike. They took infants from their mothers, snatching them by the legs and pitching their head first against the crags. They snatched the babies by their arms and threw them into the rivers, roaring with laughter. And other infants were put to the sword along with their mothers and anyone who happened to be nearby. They hung victims so their feet almost touched the ground, then placed wood at their feet and burned them alive. Live captives had their hands cut off and hung around their necks, saying, "Now go carry the message," meaning take the news to those who have fled to the mountains. The colonizers believed indigenous people are genetically destined to be enslaved because these nations are living on lands that were promised to them by God. If you are not European, not Christian, then you are to be enslaved and dehumanized. Any rights to practice your customs or beliefs will be denied. This continued for 200 years. In the 1800s, the Age of Enlightenment, which is an intellectual and cultural movement in favour of scientific proof or reasoning, questioning of their existing belief system. In history, many of these people who had been privileged because of imperialism were not just racist but were inherently classist of social class. Many of these people who attended these institutions and took part in the Age of Enlightenment and the construction of modern intellectual theory were also heavily invested in the slave trade and the dispossession of indigenous people. Imperialist ideas of racism continue to perpetuate in the workforce when Māori are more likely to be referred to social services, or those within the health system are less likely to receive pain relief, but more likely to be discharged early from hospital. Māori women are more likely to experience increased blood loss during childbirth, and many of these ideas stem from the same intellectual tradition that dark-skinned people can endure high levels of pain or simply left unattended long enough and eventually will pass away. If you were to print out all the Crown acknowledged violations of Te Tiriti o Waitangi, you'd need more than a ream of paper. It would take 662 pages to print those violations out. These are only the Crown acknowledged violations up until 1992. That does not include the more contemporary violations from 1992 to date. Te Tiriti o Waitangi 1840 evolved from the doctrine of discoveries. The comparative is Te Tiriti established a partnership between Māori and Pākehā as a way to create a space to work out problems and differences. In comparison, the doctrine of discovery applied ruthless force on Indigenous people. By contrast, it has taken 200 years for the colonisers to take a new civilised approach. Not all Indigenous tribes signed the Te Tiriti. The Moriori from the Chatham Islands did not sign. The Chatham Islands are a colony of islands 862 kilometres east of Christchurch. The Moriori migrated from East Polynesia who occupied the Chatham Islands. They were a peaceful tribe who were against warfare and killing. Māori from North Taranaki invaded the Chatham Islands in 1835, where injustices were inflicted on the Moriori by the invading tribes, and the exposure to new diseases resulted in the population dwindling to a few hundred. In 1841, a German colony wanted to buy the island, but because the islands were annexed to New Zealand, preventing the sale to the Germans. Te Tiriti o Waitangi is a document used to protect the Indigenous people who are exposed to subjugation or appropriation of their land or resources. On the 14th of February 2020, the Crown presented the descendants of the Moriori a deed of settlement and an apology from the government for the grievances that they had suffered over the years. In contrast, incidents of injustices occurred to the Torres Strait Islanders, where the Torres Strait Treaty, established in 1978, a zone was established that protects the land and sea environment of the Torres Strait for the islanders. The Torres Strait Aboriginal cultural rights are protected under International Law 2019. The treaty is in place and can help address any injustices that the islanders encounter. Racism is a key determinant of the health of the Indigenous Torres Strait Islanders, and studies found issues like food insecurity was based on household income, lifestyle risk factors related to smoking, alcohol consumption and obesity. Social support and the ability to get help from family and friends or neighbours was difficult. Single parent status, household with a child, number of occupants per household, and geographic location are key factors that were assessed. In contrast, imperialist ideas of racism wreak havoc on Indigenous peoples' psychological health based on recent findings. Racism still exists for coloured people who are believed to have thick skins. For example, the vaccination programs for COVID-19, where medical professionals believed that longer needles were needed to vaccinate because dark-skinned people who are inherently thicker skinned. These harmful ideals from early missionaries did not return to Europe, but left a trail of dispossessed, destitute Indigenous societies. These are the fundamental underpinning principles that the formation of governments, systems and policies that were created out of these ideas. Legislation was forged out of these ideas. Policies were forged out of these ideas. This is how racist ideas became systemized. An article written by Daniel Nyberg talks about the role of corporate political activity as a form of corruption, and he highlights and describes how the racist wealth can enable particular corporate groups to have undue political influence with the ability to influence media, to purchase space in newspapers, to purchase space and time online, to purchase space on television, and to put their political ideas and enhance a political influence. According to Professor Claire Carter, the doctrine of discoveries had legal grounds for the British to claim the South Island but not the North Island. Te Tiriti o Waitangi allowed Māori to retain tino rangatiratanga self-determination. The doctrine of discoveries was used as a precedent in New Zealand's domestic law up until recently, 2023. To date, Māori leaders called on King Charles and the New Zealand government to reject the doctrine of discovery, but got no response and were declined. What would a new political economic system look like if ideals of manaakitanga, kindness, respect, humility, hospitality, or aroha, love, compassion and empathy for each other were embedded into the political and economic system and the social health and education system? Our future and the future of our mokopuna, grandchildren, and the well-being of Papatūānuku, Mother Earth, are at stake. Te Tiriti o Waitangi is supposed to unite people rather than divide them. I believe my tupuna had insightful wisdom to perspicaciously see a way forward, to bring us out of a dark past and chart a new pathway towards justice for our mokopuna and protect the well-being of Papatūānuku.